Hi everyone, this is Nicole from Be So Creative. I'm so excited to be here doing our Kids in the Kitchen beginning sewing class. Today we are going to be making my grandkids pot holder. I'm so excited to get stitching with you all. This is going to be such a fun project. So just to kind of go over our pattern, the materials you'll need are 3 fat quarters, and that's going to be enough to make 2 pot holders. The cutting instructions will tell you to go ahead and cut an 8.5-inch strip from each of your fat quarters. So you'll have 8.5 inches by 21, and then you're going to subcut those into 8.5-inch squares. The next thing that we're going to do is we are going to get our blue and our white squares. I'm going to lay my other ones aside, and we're going to go ahead and press them in half. So there's a couple ways you can do this. You can simply just finger press them. If you have an adult and you want to iron them, you can always grab your little iron and gently put it down on your crease. The other thing is we have this amazing tool called a fabric folding pin, and you fill the little reservoir with some concentrated starch that comes in the package and the rest with water. It's just a felt tip pin, and I love this because we don't always want to be using a hot iron. And so we just draw a nice little crease right along that finger press, and that presses our fabric nicely. We're going to go ahead and press all of our blue fabrics, both of those squares, and we're going to do the same thing to our white ones. And I'm going to use my fabric folding pin because I really love the crisp crease that it gives us when we do this project. And we're going to get a nice crease on all of those, and then we're going to set them aside because we won't use them for a couple more steps. So again, a finger press there, just so I can see that crease. I'm going to run my pin, but if you have your grown-up with you, you can certainly just use a warm iron to put a nice crease in there. So we're going to set those aside. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to get our red fat quarters that we cut down to 8.5-inch squares, and we're going to get our 2 batting bits, and we're going to make a sandwich. So the first thing we need to know is fabric. Fabric has a right side and a wrong side. So this bright red, this is the right side. I can read everything, the colors are vibrant. The wrong side of our fabric is where things look backwards. You can see kind of the weaving of the fabric. This is our wrong side, and this is our right side. We're going to leave one of our squares wrong side down on our surface, and then we're going to get both of our batting. We have a regular batting, and then we have a shiny batting, and this is Insulbrite. This helps to kind of insulate against the heat a little bit more. And we're going to get both of these and lay them on top of the wrong side of our red square. And you'll notice that your batting, it's a little bit smaller. It's about 1/2 inch shorter all the way around. And that is exactly what we want. So we're going to center this. You can kind of see I've centered it. I have equal amounts of fabric showing around all of the edges, about 1/2 inch. And then I'm going to get my last piece of red fabric. I'm going to lay it on top to finish my sandwich. And I'm going to smooth everything out, and we have our sandwich. To get it ready for quilting, I'm going to pop a couple pins in there. And so when we're quilting, we're not going to quilt over our pins. We'll remove them first. Other options, if you want, there is something called basting spray. It's like glue that comes out of a spray can, and that also helps keep all of our layers together while we quilt. And the quilting is simply doing some stitches to keep all of our layers together. So once you've pinned it, you just want to double check. I don't have any big bubbles. Everything's nice and smooth. And then I check the back side because sometimes you can get bubbles back here. Once I'm really happy that everything is nice and smooth, I'm going to take it over to my machine and I'm going to do some quilting stitches. When you take it to your machine, you have some different options. So I'm just going to stitch with a regular foot. If you have a walking foot or maybe you have dual feed, that's going to help all of those layers move nicely. I don't have this on this machine, and that's going to be just fine. The other thing is I'm going to stretch out my stitch length just a little bit while I quilt. And I'm just going to put my foot down, take a couple stitches, and then I'll back stitch, and I'm just going to quilt an X on this one. Right through to the corner. I'm going to lift up my foot. Oh, looks like I need some scissors. Oh, I got some thread stuck in there. So we're going to trim that, and then I'm going to trim those threads, and I'm going to do another diagonal line. And when you quilt your project, you can really do any quilting you want. You can play with it, whatever you think is best. All we need is these stitches to hold our fabric together. Oh. And so one thing I want you to notice is because I'm not using one of those special feet that we talked about, things like puckers can happen. See that? But it's okay. It's a pot holder. So when I sew this together, I'll just make sure that's on the inside because my back still looks really good. So we'll just do a couple more quilting stitches, and I'm going to take out my pin because I know that it's going to go right through this, and sometimes slowing down can help reduce some of those little puckers as well. And then I'm going to trim that, and we will do one more stitch right through the center of this. And again, you can quilt however you would like. It doesn't have to be this kind of star shape that I'm doing. And so we're going to come back over to our little pinning station. And so we've quilted it. And we've got, you know, some puckers on this side because I was going a little fast. And I'm looking at this side and he looks pretty good. So one thing before I start is I'm going to trim some of these extra threads. And that's just going to help keep my machine running smoothly and make sure none of these threads get stuck in my bobbin area. So we're going to actually look at our pattern. We are going to look really carefully at step number 4. And this is where we're going to do the fabric weaving that's going to help create this little pattern. So those pieces that we set aside that we had creased, we're going to start with our blue. I'm going to grab one blue piece just like our directions, and I'm going to make sure my little wrinkly side gets stuck in my middle. I'm going to put the crease on the inside of my project and align the raw edges with the outside of my project. And then I'm going to grab a white firework print, and I'm going to do the same thing, lay him on top. The crease is on the inside, the raw edges are on the outside. I'm going to grab another blue one. Again, crease is going to go on the inside, lay him on top, and we're just following that diagram on our pattern. This last piece is a little tricky here. We're going to get the first piece that we laid down and we're going to flip him over. So all you should see is blue and one little square of red. I'm going to get this firework piece, add some extra fabric there, lay him on top, raw edges inside, and now I've got this cute little checkerboard. And before I pin him, I want to make sure that my middle is pretty closed. So I'm just going to kind of scrunch him in. And once I'm pretty happy with everything, everything's kind of aligned up nicely. All of my raw edges are lined up. My middle is scrunched in. I'm going to pop a couple pins in there. And then I'm going to go around and I'm going to sew all the way around the project with a 1/2 inch seam. And I'm going to finish this off. Now we're not leaving any holes to turn anything inside out. We are just going to stitch all the way around every single edge, and we're going to back stitch. That means take a couple stitches back and then go forward at the start and at the end of our project. So I'm going to head back over to the sewing machine here, and I'm just going to pop my project in. And so I can get a 1/2 inch, I'm going to move my needle over. And if you stretched out your stitch for the quilting part, make sure that you shorten it back up again to about a 2.5 for the stitching part so we can finish. So I'm not stitching over pins. Our machines don't really like it. So I'm going to take a couple stitches forward and then a couple stitches back. And if you have the ability on your machine, it would be good if you can put your needle down. What that means is when I stitch, my needle's going to stay in the down. That's going to help us when we get to our corners. So we're just going to stitch all the way down. When I get to a corner, I'm going to stop about 1/2 inch. My needle's down, so it's holding my spot. And then I'm just going to keep stitching. That's called a pivot. Take out my needle because I don't want to roll over him. Again, I'm about 1/2 inch, and you can eyeball it. It's a pot holder. It doesn't have to be perfect. Ooh. So you see, I actually let that little white piece of fabric, he got folded the wrong way. So if that happens, just do a couple back stitches. And then I'll lift up my foot and make sure he is under and doesn't lift up again. And there we go. So keep going. And I went a little too far, so I'm just going to take a few back stitches and get my needle where I want to go. And then keep stitching. Oh, see, that's happening again, but this time I caught it before I had to back stitch. So we're going to make sure it all lies flat. And then we're going to go a few more, lift it up, and I'm almost to the end. So when I finish, I want my seams to line up. Because you're sewing your 1/2 inch, it should see everything's lining up, and I'm going to do a couple back stitches just to lock that in place. And then since I put my needle down, I have to tell it I want it to go up. And we are going to cut those off, and we're going to bring it back to the table. So we have everything nice and sewn together. But before we turn it inside out, when the magic happens, we are going to trim off the bulk. So when we look at our corners here, we've got a lot of extra fabric. We're just going to kind of take the top off. And so we're not cutting through our stitches. See, we didn't cut through, we just cut that little corner. We're going to do that to all of the corners. And also now would be the time if you have any loose thread that you wanted to trim, you would also want to tidy that up as well. So I have all of my little bits and bobs. Oh, I have some loose threads. I'm going to trim that friend. So all of my corners are trimmed, and now the magic. This is a favorite part of the project. I'm going to turn it inside out. And then using either my finger or a point turner tool, I'm going to push out all of those little corners just so they lie nice and flat. If you had a chopstick or maybe like the edge of a spoon or something, I'm just going to use my fingers here. You can really work those corners because you see that guy's a little denty compared to this guy. Oh, he's still a little denty. But pushing them out just really helps make your project look nice at the end. See, he's a little bit better. We're just going to work our fingers. And when you're doing that, you're not just going to go in between 2 layers. You actually want to go to the inside, okay? Because otherwise you're not going to get to the bulk of where the fabric is getting bunched under there. And you can just work all of those little corners through. And if you had like these scissors, they're not very sharp at the end. So I could kind of just work them in there to get those corners nice and turned out. And then you will have a completed pot holder, and you'll be ready for all of your holiday cooking, all of your fun stuff that you're going to do. Here's our completed patchwork pot holder. I hope you enjoyed making this project, and in your kits you had enough to do too. So we'd love to see all of your finished projects. Thanks so much, guys. Have a great day.